On today's show, the future stars of the Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the future stars of the Capitals. Now, oftentimes we talk about Leonard, we talk about Miro, we talk about Crystal, but their pipeline for the Capitals is full. And this team is going to be exponentially better, if you can believe it, than it is right now. We'll talk about those players a bit later. We'll talk about on defense, Cam Allen stands to be a good upgrade for the future. A bit of a roller coaster as far as his personal life is concerned, but it does appear that he is on the right track for success. We'll talk about him, and we'll talk about Ilya Protas. Yes, brother of Aliaksei Protas. And you think to yourself, what are the odds of two brothers being really good at hockey? Well, that is the case, as both Ilya and Aliaksei are great players. What's the latest with Ilya? But just to get it going, we're going to talk about Graeme Clarke and Patrick Thomas. Graeme Clarke, a right wing, and Patrick Thomas, a center. And, just to get going here, talking about the Capitals as is, that we know that this team is going to be facing a lot of changes. Ostensibly, this is going to be the final season of Alex Ovechkin on the Capitals in the NHL. Could be the same thing for John Carlson. And we already know that Nick Backstrom is gone, going to be playing hockey in Sweden. TJ Oshie, Evgeny Kuznetsov, these players that were big for the Capitals for years. Some of them, it was age. Some of them, it was just a mismatch. This team looks markedly different than it did just a couple of years ago. Now, listen, the Capitals did bring in some big acquisitions last summer. This summer, not so much, but they did bring in some depth players, some young players that I think have some pretty good upside. So let's talk about some of the youth talent in the Capitals organization. And let's talk first about Graeme Clarke. That was one of the moves that happened this summer. Talking about him, a right winger who just signed with the Capitals this July after a strong season with the Iowa Wild. And it was one of the names, probably not too familiar unless you are, just a big hockey fan and you're familiar with the NHL and AHL. But 24 years old, he put together a nice AHL resume, 282 career games, 84 goals, and over 180 points. Pretty good. Some young talent with a good upside. Last season alone, if you take a look at it, he tallied 37 points, 16 goals, 21 assists in 64 games for Iowa. So you take a look at it, a good depth player, I guess I'm going to say at this point. And just taking a look at what he has accomplished, he also tied the team lead in game-winning goals with 4 and led the club in shots on goal with 186. This guy doesn't hesitate to shoot the puck. And the Capitals have talked about working on more. Don't think about it. Don't look for the cutesy pass. Shoot the puck. It does appear that Graeme Clarke has that in his DNA. Now, look, Graeme isn't, like I said, a household name, but he's one of those, what I'm going to say, sneaky good players that teams love stashing in the AHL. What are some of the things that we saw from the Capitals in the playoffs this past season? They made it to the playoffs. Yay. They made it to the second round. Yes. They got eliminated in the second round. Not so good. So the Capitals want to be built to face whatever is thrown their way. If there's injury, if there's inconsistent play, that they have the players down in Hershey that are ready to step up and help this team. Now, listen, we know that the Capitals saw some departures, and the departures, like I've talked about in the show, I'm not super bummed about, but you need to bring some players in. Same thing goes for Chocolatetown. Hershey saw some departures as well, so you need to restock the pond down in Hershey as well, so the Capitals can be ready to face whatever is thrown their way. And you get depth, you get experience, and you get some insurance. And the good thing about Graeme Clarke that I like is that he has some NHL talent. What have we seen with some of the younger Capitals prospects before is they played well in Hershey, and they get their opportunity to play with the Capitals and not so much. Think Pierre Dubé, for example, absolutely torched it a season or two ago in Hershey, got his opportunity with the Capitals, and let's say he didn't set the world on fire. So being that he has that experience is huge. He played 3 NHL games for New Jersey, so he knows what that level looks like. Wouldn't shock me if he ends up being a bottom 6 injury call-up at some point this season. Of course, a lot of this is in his court. How does he excel? How does he play in Hershey? It's not a pejorative to say that you're playing for the Hershey Bears in the American Hockey League. You take a look at them winning back-to-back Calder Cups. And in the thick of it this past season, this team is built very well, all the way from the ECHL, AHL, all the way to the NHL. So to have him in the fold is huge. Now let's talk about Patrick Thomas, a center and a playmaker out of the OHL. And, you take a look at the Capitals, they're sitting pretty well, I'm going to say, at the center position. The only question mark, of course, I would say is that third line center position. But I think that Patrick Thomas could serve to be a good center in the future, right? I think that he's got a pretty good upside. He was the Caps' 4th round pick in 2023 and just signed his entry-level contract this summer. So the Capitals are all in on him as he signed that contract. And I think just from taking a look at some of the footage on him, I think there is some pretty good upside. Thomas wrapped up his overage season with the Brantford Bulldogs, where he served as a team captain and dropped, get this, a ridiculous 104 points in 66 games. Wow. I guess that would be an understatement, but I think that if you take a look at what he has in the tank, quite impressive. That also included a league-leading 77 assists. So, like I say, we know who is on the team right now. It's Strome, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Nick Dowd, and most likely going to be Connor Michael, third-line center. But to have this kind of raw talent just kind of simmering in the crock pot could be huge. He sees the ice very well, is what I noticed. He creates lanes, delivers tape-to-tape passes. Some of the things that I guess I'm going to say the Capitals have struggled with at points, most noticeably, I'm going to say in the second round of the playoffs against the Hurricanes. So to see a guy that excels at that is huge. And it's not just what kind of player he is. He also is a great leader. Wore the C on his chest for Brantford as a 20-year-old. That says quite a bit. To be captain of a team at 20 years old, that speaks of his leadership. And ultimately, I think why the Capitals are really in on him. Taking a look at his contract, how much is he making? His deal is for 3 years, $878 AAV at the NHL level. But the big question is, can Thomas transition to the AHL right away and keep that momentum going, or does he need a year to find his footing in the pros before he can really get going? And you don't know, right? I think that, when we took a look at Ryan Leonard, we thought that he was going to jump from the NCAA and join the Capitals and just shoot straight to the moon. Not the case. So I think it's important to limit your expectations for Crystal. For a lot of these guys, Crystal, I think, could make the NHL roster, but in this case, Thomas, for him if he's playing in Hershey, right? And how he excels there as well. So all things considered, I think a good upgrade. I think Hershey is going to be a team to watch. When you're not watching the Capitals, it is going to be some fun hockey to watch down in Chocolatetown. That much I know for sure. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the defense and Cam Allen and a bit of a bumpy road that he's had thus far. What's the latest? I'll discuss next. We've all been there before, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress or ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. So when your favorite band or your favorite performer is coming to town, take all the stress out of it with Game Time. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. What? You never see that. And you can save up to 60% off with their killer last minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Game Time's Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. Ever wonder what your view will look like? They have it covered on the app. There's so much to love. So do that. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking about a player with some good upside, but to say it hasn't been smooth sailing for him thus far in his young life would be an understatement. I think that he has realized his error that he's made, his misjudgment in his life, and it does appear that his life is on the right track and what I think is going to be a truly great defender for the Capitals in years to come. So let's dive into segment 2 and talk about Cam Allen, a story of redemption, right shot defenseman who's had a roller coaster few years. And back in 2022, Allen was being talked about as a potential first round pick. But after some inconsistent play in a major shoulder injury that required surgery, he slid to the 5th round in 2023, where the Capitals scooped him up at 136 overall. And, it's those kind of things in life. It was kind of the same thing with Miro as well, with that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that he would have gotten higher in the draft. But sometimes, you got to kind of read into these players, and I know that, Ross Mahoney and his crew, they have done a really good job doing that year after year. But then this past season, he split time between Guelph Storm and London Knights in the Ontario Hockey League. And he was great. 45 points in 47 games, plus 6 more in the playoffs, and helping the Knights capture the Memorial Cup, and getting some good reps in there, getting in some good play. 45 points in 47 games, and Memorial Cup action that is preparing you for the road ahead, where it's going to be that much more difficult. But like I said off the top of the segment, it hasn't been all smooth sailing for him. I think the ceiling was high on him, but as a lot of young people in life, they sometimes make mistakes. Some of them are little mistakes and some of them are bigger mistakes. But Allen was arrested in February for drunk driving after a single car accident. To get on my soapbox here for a moment, there is no excuse to be drunk driving anymore. There's Uber, there's taxi cabs, there's asking a friend for a ride home. Never, ever, ever, never drive around while you're buzzed or drunk. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt someone else. And I think that Cam Allen learned that lesson. He pled guilty, received probation, community service, and underwent treatment. Now, listen, and, I've made mistakes in my life. And what I always tell a person, I'm like, I can't push rewind. I can't undo what I've done. I'm just going to try to be a better person going forward. I think that is the same thing with Cam Allen, right? That not ideal. And, the Capitals in general don't look too kindly or too they don't look well on those kind of altercations, shall we say. But I think that they've seen that he has turned his life around. He also got a 15-game suspension from the OHL, which he served while beginning his recovery plan. But then, since then, an about face, Cam Allen has turned a major corner. And I think that was the redemption for his hockey career, not just on the ice, but off it too. He talked about using journaling, daily affirmations, what he calls a personal creed. He's leaned on teammates. One in particular, you might know, number 43, Tom Wilson, has reportedly been a mentor through the whole process. They train together sometimes. So I think that is a good thing. And I think that, Tom Wilson being the future captain of this team and kind of vouching for him, I guess you could say. And if there's a good player and a good person to emulate to see how you do things the right way in hockey, I'm going to go ahead and say Tom Wilson is that guy. Now, it's all about, brushing off your shoulders and trying to leave the past in the past, because Allen's got a clean slate now, and he's expected to make his pro debut in Hershey this fall. Again, another exciting player. I'm going to watch the Capitals, but I'm going to do my darndest to watch as many Hershey Bears games as possible. It is going to be amazing. But the thing I like about him, if you don't know, he's mobile, he's got a good shot, and mentally, he's very sound. Still, just 20 years old, and this feels like a second chance the kid's grabbing with both hands. Again, put up good numbers last year, and let's hope that this continue to keep going forward in the pro level, playing for Hershey. Could he become a next middle pair defender at some point? Maybe. I guess it remains to be seen. A lot of this is the ball being in his court, but a guy that has had a tough go of it and making some, poor decisions, like I say, like all of us make at some time in our life. But the important thing for him is that it does appear that he learned from it. And, the one thing that the Capitals need is good defenders. And if you take a look at the film and what I've talked about in segment 2 here, he checks a lot of the boxes that the Capitals are looking for on the blue line. I'm willing to give him a second chance. I think you as Capitals fans should be willing to give him a second chance. And let's root for this guy. Let's hope he knocks it out of the park in Hershey and maybe can join the Capitals sooner than later. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the younger brother of Aliaksei Protas, Ilia Protas, equally as good. Can you believe it? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in segment 3 here, there's still a lot to get to, so thanks for sticking around, and we're going to talk about Ilya Protas. The younger brother of Aliaksei Protas. And again, when he was drafted, I'm like, do they have a thing for Protases? And you wouldn't think to yourself that two brothers would be that great. And I know we've seen that before on the NHL. It's just interesting that two brothers on the same team knocking it out of the park. It does appear that that's what the Capitals have. Aliaksei, a guy that really excelled right out of the gate. And, Ilya Protas, a young guy that I think will be joining the Capitals sooner than later. I mean, it's up to him, right, to see how well he does in the fall. So let's dive into that in the final segment here. We're talking about Ilya Protas. And when I'm talking about young Capitals players, he's one of the ones that gets me the most excited. Right wing, the younger brother, like I said, of Aliaksei, and maybe the most exciting name in the entire Capitals pipeline. Why is that? Why? Is it just because he's a Protas? No, he absolutely torched the OHL with the Windsor Spitfires. 124 points in 61 games. Knocked it out Clarke. That's 50 goals, 74 assists, and a plus 58 rating. Oh, and did I forget to tell you, he's only 19 years old. He also earned the OHL's Most Sportsmanlike Player Award and made the second All-Star team. If you're not drinking the Kool-Aid on Ilya yet, you should be. Before that, he was a standout in the USHL with Des Moines, 51 points in 37 games. And, if you're an everyday of the show, like I've said, a prototypical Capital. What do you mean, prototypical Capital? 6'5", 198 pounds. Aliaksei big, Ilya big, and could honestly probably grow into that frame a little bit more. So the frame is there, the production is there, and the best part, the hockey IQ is there. He's not just this big, not really smart hockey player. The IQ is there. The shot's there. It's all there. The Capitals drafted him in the third round in 2024, if you don't remember, and they wasted no time. He's already signed to a 3-year entry-level contract worth $889 AAV. So what now? It is not a crystal clear path in which direction he will go. Do the Capitals send him to Windsor to dominate again? We saw that with Andrew Crystal, right? That sometimes these guys need a little bit more time to cook, if you will. Or do they send him early to the Hershey Bears and get him used to pro-level speed? Either way, you got to be thinking long-term top 6 winger here. The upside is high, and, don't overlook the brother connection. Aliaksei's got 169 NHL games under his belt already, and he put up record numbers this past year. Imagine both of them on the ice, just knocking it out of the park. Like I said, the Capitals are good now. Trust when I say that they are going to be exponentially better in years to come. And the good thing about having Aliaksei is that's a built-in mentor. The Protas brothers are just the second set of siblings ever drafted by the Capitals, but Ilya, he could be the one that really takes off to the next level. A lot to be excited about here, Capitals fans, as, like I've talked about, Leonard and Miro and a lot of these guys. But I would say that Ilya is always in the conversation. But, when you go down the list a little bit, you don't hear as many people talking about Cam Allen, Patrick Thomas, and Graeme Clarke, a bit of a newer addition there. But just trust me when I say that this team is going to be good. Now, people are going to say, of course, well, we don't know how well that's going to translate to the NHL. And touche, we don't. But you don't know with anyone, right? Until they make their mark on the big team and the NHL, it's all speculative. It's a bit ambiguous on how great they're going to be. But I think for Ilya Protas in particular, if there is a player you want to take a bet, a gamble on, I think that he is a safe bet. Put up big numbers. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, that it's not a far reach to think that he is going to be a good player. So what I've talked about in this episode, primarily forwards, I'm talking Clarke, Thomas, and Ilya Protas, that the Capitals are loaded for bear on the offensive front, but also defense. Cam Allen, before that whole hiccup with his personal life, I thought that he was pretty squeaky clean, and I thought had a pretty clear trajectory to playing pro hockey. So it's going to be interesting to see how well these players perform in camp, and then the players that go to Hershey or wherever they get assigned to kind of mark their growth. Like I talked about with Crystal. One of the last players cut last year, went to Kelowna, went out to Spokane, just torched it. Well, that was worth it. He got that much better. He probably would not have got those opportunities sitting up in the press box, right? So a very cool opportunity for a lot of these young players, and let's hope they make the most of these opportunities. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.